Carefully keeping watch over and criticising our governments and the representatives that they consist of is very important, but we need to make sure we do it properly and reasonably. I think we need to carefully balance the ideal and comparison to maintain a balance of high standards and realistic expectations. Let me explain what I mean. We judge governments by the ideal actions that they should have taken in a perfect world. This is important as it holds our governments to high standards, as they should be, and ensures we know what the perfect government would look like, so we can get as close to that point as possible. We also ought to judge governments by comparison to other governments. This keeps our criticism somewhat based in reality, and stops us becoming detached from what is realistically possible, in blind pursuit of an unachievable utopian ideal. We should observe how good our government is compared to other governments, as this can help us understand how good our government is in a more practical sense, in a more realistic sense. I think these two things need to be balanced, so we both hold power to high expectations and standards, and be reasonable and realistic, and understand that no government can ever be perfect. Going too hard in either direction is a huge mistake. Go too far in the ideal direction and you will lose touch with reality, and hold expectations that no real government would ever have any hope to living up to. Go too far in the realistic direction and you fail to hold power to high standards, and can accept all kinds of inefficiencies and immoralities, which could have been averted if only your standards were higher. I will give you an example from New Zealand, where I live. New Zealand doesn't really have an issue with people being obsessed with realism, and more with idealists who will get angry over the smallest things, when in comparison to the rest of the world, the New Zealand government is pretty good. People love to criticise the New Zealand government's COVID response, and that's really what I'm focusing on here. I think criticising the New Zealand government is fine and good, but it should be done in a reasonable and realistic way. You can say, hey, this could have and should have been done better, while acknowledging that in comparison to other nations, New Zealand has a pretty excellent COVID response. You can say New Zealand did a great job and can do even better. This would be a good balance of being realistic and also promoting the ideal. Some people forget about the realistic part and seem to hate the New Zealand government for not being completely perfect. This is really dumb because all governments are imperfect and make mistakes from time to time, and on the issue of COVID, the New Zealand government has made an almost uniquely small number of mistakes, as can be seen by the outcome in fighting COVID. Pushing the New Zealand government to be even better is great, but getting completely enraged because it wasn't 100% perfect when it is better than almost any other country is just stupid, and represents blind idealism falling out of touch with the reality of the complex situation the government faces. When we criticise governments, we need to think of the ideal and compare to understand what is realistic. We need to push governments to be perfect while understanding that it never actually can be. We need to have high standards while being realistic and reasonable. This is essential to a healthy criticism of government.